Before we embark on what may be the most disturbing and complex investigation I've ever undertaken into the hidden horrors of Louisiana's past, I want to personally acknowledge each of you who has chosen to join me on this journey into one of America's most carefully concealed family secrets, whether you're watching this from the comfort of your home in a bustling city or the quiet solitude of a rural community, whether it's your morning coffee companion or your late-night exploration of history's darkest corners, your presence here creates a bond that transcends time and geography. Please take a moment to share in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your world. It helps me understand the incredible global family we're building as we shine light into the shadows where truth has been buried for far too long. What I'm about to reveal began with a discovery so shocking that it took Louisiana state authorities 3 years to decide whether the evidence should ever be made public. In March 2021, during the restoration of a 19th-century plantation house that had been donated to the Louisiana Historical Society, workers discovered a hidden room behind a false wall in what had once been the kitchen. Inside this sealed chamber, they found what can only be described as a butcher shop designed for processing human beings, complete with meat hooks, cutting tables stained with substances that DNA analysis would later confirm as human blood, and most horrifying of all, a detailed business ledger documenting the sale and distribution of human flesh to restaurants throughout New Orleans and the surrounding parishes. The ledger, written in the meticulous handwriting of someone who took pride in their record-keeping, covered a period from 1902 to 1908 and detailed transactions that would challenge everything historians thought they knew about the food industry in early 20th century Louisiana. Entries described the processing of dozens of individuals, the preparation of their remains into various cuts and preparations, and their distribution to establishments throughout the region under the guise of exotic game meat. The final entry, dated September 15, 1908, simply stated, "Business concluded, all evidence disposed of, family relocating to avoid complications." It was signed with an elaborate flourish, Etienne Boudreau, proprietor, Bayou Bon Appetit. This ledger would prove to be the key to unraveling the story of the Boudreau family, whose cannibalistic enterprise operated for nearly a decade in the Louisiana bayous while supplying human flesh to some of New Orleans' most prestigious restaurants. Their story reveals not just individual depravity but a systematic network of corruption, complicity, and culinary horror that reached into the highest levels of Louisiana society and exposed the dark underbelly of the Gilded Age's obsession with exotic cuisine and sensational dining experiences. To understand the full scope and horror of what the Boudreau family accomplished during their years of operation, we must first immerse ourselves completely in the Louisiana of 1905, a state where the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, legality and lawlessness, sustenance and savagery were more fluid than anywhere else in America. Louisiana in 1905 was still recovering from the economic devastation of Reconstruction while simultaneously experiencing the early stirrings of the oil boom that would transform the region's economy. The state's population of approximately 1.4 million was scattered across vast expanses of swampland, bayous, and rural parishes where the reach of law enforcement was limited and the traditions of frontier justice still held sway. The geography of southern Louisiana created perfect conditions for the kind of isolated criminal enterprise that the Boudreau family would establish. The intricate network of bayous, swamps, and waterways that crisscrossed the region provided countless hiding places and transportation routes that were known only to locals who had spent generations navigating these treacherous waters. The dense canopy of cypress trees draped with Spanish moss created a perpetual twilight that seemed to swallow sound and conceal activities that would have been impossible to hide in more open terrain. The climate was subtropical and oppressive, with temperatures that regularly exceeded 95 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer months and humidity levels that made the air feel thick enough to drink. The constant moisture and heat created ideal conditions for rapid decomposition of organic matter, which would prove crucial to the Boudreau family's ability to dispose of evidence and maintain their operation without detection. The region was also plagued by seasonal flooding that could wash away traces of criminal activity and make it nearly impossible for authorities to conduct thorough investigations. The economic foundation of 1905 Louisiana rested primarily on agriculture, with sugar plantations, rice farms, and cotton fields dominating the landscape and providing employment for thousands of workers who lived in conditions that were often barely distinguishable from the slavery that had been abolished 40 years earlier. The timber industry was also booming, with massive logging operations clearing vast swaths of virgin forest and creating temporary communities of workers who lived in isolated camps deep in the wilderness. These transient populations of laborers, many of whom were immigrants or former convicts, provided perfect cover for criminal activities and a ready supply of victims who would not be missed if they disappeared. New Orleans, the largest city in the state with a population of approximately 325,000, served as the cultural and economic hub of Louisiana and the primary market for the Boudreaux family's horrific products. The city's unique culinary culture, which blended French, Spanish, African, and Caribbean influences, had created a sophisticated dining scene that prized exotic ingredients and unusual preparations. Wealthy residents and visitors from across the United States flocked to New Orleans restaurants that promised dining experiences unavailable anywhere else in America, creating a market for unusual meats and preparations that unscrupulous suppliers could exploit. The restaurant industry in 1905 New Orleans was dominated by a small number of elite establishments that catered to the city's wealthy residents and the growing number of tourists who came to experience the city's legendary cuisine. These restaurants competed fiercely to offer the most exotic and exclusive dining experiences, often featuring game meats, unusual seafood, and preparations that pushed the boundaries of conventional cuisine. The chefs and restaurateurs who ran these establishments were celebrities in their own right, and their reputations depended on their ability to provide ingredients and dishes that could not be found elsewhere. It was into this world of culinary competition and exotic dining that Etienne Boudreaux had positioned his family's enterprise, presenting himself as a purveyor of rare game meats and unusual delicacies from the Louisiana wilderness. The business ledger reveals that he had established relationships with at least 15 different restaurants in New Orleans, as well as several establishments in Baton Rouge, Mobile, and even as far away as Atlanta and Memphis. His clients included some of the most prestigious dining establishments in the South, restaurants that served governors, senators, and wealthy industrialists who prided themselves on their sophisticated palates and adventurous dining habits. Etienne Boudreaux himself was a figure who seemed perfectly designed to operate in the shadowy margins of Louisiana society. Born in 1865 in the small Bayou community of Lafitte, he was the son of a trapper and fisherman who had made a modest living harvesting the natural resources of the Louisiana wetlands. Contemporary descriptions, found in business correspondence and legal documents discovered in various Louisiana archives, paint him as a man of medium height and unremarkable appearance, with the kind of face that people forgot immediately after meeting him. But those who knew him well described an intelligence and charisma that allowed him to move easily between the rough world of the bayous and the refined society of New Orleans. Etienne had married Marie Thibodeau in 1890, and together they had established a legitimate business supplying game meat, seafood, and other bayou delicacies to restaurants throughout southern Louisiana. The business had been moderately successful, but the discovery of oil in nearby parishes in the early 1900s had brought an influx of workers and competition that threatened their traditional sources of income. It was apparently this economic pressure that had driven Etienne to explore more profitable and horrific alternatives to conventional game hunting. The Boudreaux family compound was located on a remote stretch of Bayou Lafourche, approximately 40 miles southwest of New Orleans, accessible only by boat or a single dirt road that was often impassable during the rainy season. The property consisted of a main house built in the traditional Acadian style, with a steep pitched roof and wide porches designed to provide relief from the oppressive heat, surrounded by several outbuildings that served various functions in the family's legitimate and illegitimate enterprises. The hidden processing facility, discovered during the 2021 restoration, had been constructed in what appeared to be a traditional smokehouse but had been extensively modified to serve its horrific purpose. The building was equipped with a sophisticated drainage system that allowed blood and other fluids to be disposed of directly into the bayou, meat hooks and cutting tables that could accommodate human-sized carcasses, and a refrigeration system that used blocks of ice shipped from New Orleans to preserve the processed meat during transportation. The family's operation was a true enterprise involving multiple generations and extended family members who each played specific roles in the horrific business. Etienne served as the leader and primary contact with restaurant clients, using his charm and business acumen to maintain relationships that were crucial to the operation's success. His wife Marie managed the processing facility and supervised the preparation of human flesh into various cuts and preparations that could be passed off as exotic game meat. Their 3 adult children also played crucial roles in the operation. their eldest son, Jean-Baptiste, born in 1891, served as the family's primary hunter, responsible for identifying and capturing victims who could be processed without attracting attention from law enforcement. Their daughter Celeste, born in 1893, managed the transportation and distribution network that delivered the processed meat to restaurants throughout the region. Their youngest son, Pierre, born in 1895, handled the disposal of evidence and maintained the elaborate system of false identities and forged documents that allowed the family to operate without detection. The victim selection process, as documented in the business ledger and supporting materials found in the hidden room, reveals a systematic approach that prioritized individuals who were unlikely to be missed or whose disappearances could be easily explained. The primary targets were transient workers from the logging camps and oil fields, immigrants who had recently arrived in Louisiana and had no established social connections, and individuals who were already marginalized by society due to mental illness, alcoholism, or criminal backgrounds. The family had developed an elaborate system for identifying and approaching potential victims, often using Jean-Baptiste's legitimate hunting and trapping activities as cover for surveillance operations. He would spend weeks in remote areas, observing worker camps and identifying individuals who fit the family's criteria for selection. The approach was always carefully planned, with victims being lured away from their communities through offers of employment, promises of transportation to other areas, or simply through the kind of hospitality that was traditional in Louisiana culture. The processing operation itself, as described in Marie's detailed notes found among the discovered documents, was conducted with the kind of systematic efficiency that would have been admired in any legitimate meat processing facility. Victims were typically killed quickly and humanely, as the family understood that stress and fear could affect the quality of the meat. The bodies were then processed using techniques that Marie had apparently learned from her father, who had been a butcher in New Orleans before moving to the bayous. The meat was prepared in various forms designed to disguise its true nature while appealing to the sophisticated palates of New Orleans diners. The most popular preparation was what the ledger describes as bayou venison, which was actually human flesh that had been aged and seasoned to resemble deer meat. Other preparations included exotic fowl, made from processed human organs, rare game sausages, that combined human meat with traditional spices and seasonings, and delicate pâtés, that were served at the most exclusive dining establishments in the city. The distribution network that Celeste managed was remarkably sophisticated, involving a fleet of boats and wagons that could transport the processed meat from the bayou compound to restaurants throughout the region while maintaining the cold chain necessary to preserve freshness. The family had established relationships with ice suppliers, transportation companies, and even customs officials who facilitated the movement of their products without asking uncomfortable questions about their origin. The restaurant clients who purchased the Boudreau family's products were among the most prestigious establishments in the South, including Antoine's Restaurant, which had been serving New Orleans elite since 1840, Arnaud's, which was known for its innovative Creole cuisine, and Commander's Palace, which attracted diners from across the United States. The chefs at these establishments apparently believed they were purchasing exotic game meat from the Louisiana wilderness, and the high prices they paid reflected the premium that wealthy diners were willing to pay for unique culinary experiences. The financial success of the operation was extraordinary, with the business ledger showing annual revenues that exceeded $50,000 by 1907, equivalent to more than $1.5 million in today's money. This income allowed the Boudreau family to live in comfort while maintaining the appearance of a modest bayou family that made their living through traditional hunting and fishing activities. They invested their profits in real estate, legitimate businesses, and even stocks and bonds, creating a financial foundation that would have sustained them for generations if their horrific enterprise had not been discovered. The protection that allowed the family to operate for nearly a decade came from a combination of geographic isolation, careful victim selection, and strategic corruption of local officials who might have posed a threat to their operation. The ledger documents regular payments to Sheriff Auguste Thibodeau of Lafourche Parish, who received $200 monthly to ensure that any reports of missing persons in his jurisdiction were not investigated too thoroughly. Similar payments were made to officials in neighboring parishes and even to federal agents who might have become involved if the operation had attracted attention from outside Louisiana. The beginning of the end for the Boudreau family's cannibalistic enterprise came in the spring of 1908, when a series of events converged to threaten their carefully maintained secrecy. the first warning sign was the arrival of a new federal prosecutor in New Orleans, James Morrison, who had been sent from Washington with a mandate to investigate corruption in Louisiana's legal system. Morrison was a career prosecutor who had built his reputation by taking on organized crime in Chicago and was not susceptible to the kind of local pressures that had protected the Boudreaux operation. The second threat came from an unexpected source, a young journalist named Thomas Kearney from the New Orleans Item, who had begun investigating reports of unusual meat being served at several high-end restaurants in the city. Kearney had been tipped off by a disgruntled chef who claimed that some of the exotic game being served at his restaurant had an unusual taste and texture that didn't match any meat he had encountered in his 20 years of professional cooking. The final threat was the most dangerous of all, a survivor. In July 1908, a young man named Michel Tran, a Vietnamese immigrant who had been working in the oil fields near Morgan City, managed to escape from the Boudreaux compound after being held captive for 3 days. Tran had been selected as a victim because he was a recent immigrant with no family connections in Louisiana, but his background as a fisherman in Vietnam had given him skills that the family had not anticipated. Tran's escape and subsequent testimony to federal authorities provided the first detailed account of the Boudreaux family's operation from someone who had witnessed it firsthand. His description of the processing facility, the systematic nature of the operation, and the involvement of multiple family members gave investigators the information they needed to begin building a case against the family. The federal investigation that followed was led by Morrison and involved agents from the newly created Bureau of Investigation, the predecessor to the FBI. The investigation was complicated by the remote location of the Boudreaux compound, the destruction of evidence that the family had undertaken as soon as they realized they were under suspicion, and the reluctance of local officials to cooperate with federal authorities. The raid on the Boudreaux compound took place on September 10, 1908, involving more than 50 federal agents and Louisiana state police officers who surrounded the property at dawn and conducted a systematic search of all buildings and surrounding areas. What they found exceeded even their worst expectations: the processing facility with its human remains, detailed business records documenting years of cannibalistic commerce, and physical evidence that confirmed the scope and systematic nature of the operation. But the Boudreaux family was gone. According to neighbors, they had left the compound 3 days earlier, taking only personal belongings and leaving behind the infrastructure of their horrific business. A massive manhunt was launched, involving law enforcement agencies throughout the South and even international cooperation with authorities in Mexico and Canada, but no trace of the family was ever found. The investigation of the restaurants that had purchased the Boudreaux family's products created a scandal that rocked New Orleans society and had lasting effects on the city's culinary reputation. Several prominent chefs and restaurateurs were arrested and charged with conspiracy, though most claimed ignorance of the true nature of the meat they had been serving. The trials that followed were conducted largely in secret, as authorities feared that public knowledge of the full scope of the cannibalistic commerce would destroy New Orleans' tourism industry. The psychological impact on the community was devastating and long-lasting. The knowledge that some of the city's most prestigious restaurants had unknowingly served human flesh to their customers created a crisis of confidence that took years to overcome. Many restaurants closed permanently, while others struggled to rebuild their reputations and convince customers that their kitchens were safe. The broader implications of the case extended far beyond Louisiana to influence federal legislation and law enforcement practices throughout the United States. The Boudreaux case was one of the factors that led to the expansion of federal jurisdiction over interstate commerce crimes and the development of more sophisticated investigative techniques for dealing with organized criminal enterprises. From a criminological perspective, the Boudreaux family represents one of the most systematic and long-lasting examples of organized cannibalism in American history. The business-like approach they took to their horrific enterprise, complete with detailed record-keeping, quality control, and customer service, challenges conventional understanding of cannibalistic behavior and suggests that such crimes can be motivated by profit as much as by psychological compulsion. The psychological analysis of the family members, based on witness testimony and the detailed records they left behind, reveals a group dynamic that allowed normal family relationships to coexist with systematic murder and cannibalism. The fact that multiple generations participated in the operation suggests that the behavior was normalized within the family structure and passed down as a form of twisted family tradition. The economic analysis of the operation reveals the enormous profits that could be generated through the systematic exploitation of human victims and the willingness of wealthy consumers to pay premium prices for exotic dining experiences without questioning the source of their food. The Boudreaux family's success demonstrates how market demand for unusual products can create opportunities for criminal enterprises that are willing to cross moral boundaries that legitimate businesses cannot. The cultural impact of the case can be seen in its influence on Louisiana folklore and the development of urban legends about cannibalistic families in the bayous. However, these fictional adaptations have often obscured the very real horror of what the Boudreaux family accomplished and the systematic nature of their crimes against dozens of innocent victims. The investigation also revealed the extent to which corruption had penetrated Louisiana's law enforcement and political systems, allowing the family to operate with virtual impunity for years while authorities who should have been protecting the public instead took bribes to look the other way. The case led to significant reforms in Louisiana's criminal justice system and the establishment of new oversight mechanisms designed to prevent similar corruption in the future. The international implications of the case were equally significant, as evidence suggested that the Boudreaux family had been in contact with similar operations in other countries and may have been part of a larger network of cannibalistic commerce that operated across national borders. This led to increased cooperation between international law enforcement agencies and the development of new protocols for investigating crimes that cross jurisdictional boundaries. The preservation of evidence from the Boudreaux compound has provided researchers with unprecedented insight into the psychology and methodology of organized cannibalism, contributing to our understanding of how such crimes develop and persist within family or group structures. The detailed business records left behind by the family have been studied by criminologists, psychologists, and sociologists seeking to understand how normal family dynamics can be corrupted to enable systematic criminal behavior. The impact on the victims' families and communities was profound and lasting, as many people never learned the truth about what had happened to their missing relatives. The federal investigation identified at least 47 individuals who had been processed by the Boudreaux operation, but the actual number of victims may have been much higher, as the family's records only covered the period from 1902 to 1908 and there was evidence that they had been operating on a smaller scale for several years before that. The case continues to influence contemporary discussions about food safety, restaurant regulation, and the responsibility of businesses to verify the sources of their products. The fact that prestigious restaurants unknowingly served human flesh to their customers for years has led to more stringent requirements for supplier verification and chain-of-custody documentation in the food industry. The mystery of what happened to the Boudreaux family after their escape has never been solved. Despite decades of investigation by law enforcement agencies and amateur researchers, some theories suggest that they fled to Mexico or South America, where they may have continued their cannibalistic enterprise in areas with even less law enforcement oversight. Others believe that they may have been killed by associates who feared that their capture would expose the broader network of corruption that had protected their operation. The discovery of the hidden processing facility in 2021 has reignited interest in the case and raised new questions about whether other similar operations may have existed in Louisiana or other states during the early 20th century. The sophisticated nature of the Boudreaux family's enterprise suggests that they may have learned their techniques from others or taught their methods to associates who continued the practice elsewhere. The psychological trauma experienced by investigators, prosecutors, and others who were exposed to evidence of the Boudreaux family's crimes has been documented in personal accounts and official reports that reveal the lasting impact of confronting such systematic evil. Many of the people involved in the investigation reported nightmares, depression, and other symptoms that would today be recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The case has also influenced academic research into the sociology of deviance and the factors that allow criminal behavior to become normalized within family or community structures. The Boudreaux family's ability to maintain normal social relationships while engaging in systematic cannibalism challenges conventional understanding of how criminal behavior develops and persists over time. As we reflect on the story of the Boudreaux family and their decade-long reign of cannibalistic commerce in the Louisiana bayous, we must grapple with uncomfortable questions about the nature of evil, the power of family loyalty, and the vulnerability of society to criminal enterprises that operate in the shadows of legitimate business. Their story reminds us that the most dangerous criminals are often those who can maintain the appearance of normalcy while engaging in the most horrific acts imaginable. the systematic nature of their operation, complete with business planning, quality control, and customer service, reveals how criminal enterprises can adopt the methods of legitimate business to achieve greater efficiency and profitability in their illegal activities. The fact that they were able to operate for years while supplying human flesh to some of the most prestigious restaurants in the South demonstrates the importance of verification and oversight in any industry where public safety is at stake. The courage shown by Michel Tran in escaping from the Boudreaux compound and testifying against the family, despite the obvious danger to his own life, serves as a powerful reminder that even the most systematic criminal enterprises can be brought down by the bravery of individual victims who refuse to remain silent. His willingness to come forward, despite his vulnerable status as a recent immigrant, ultimately saved countless other potential victims and brought an end to one of the most horrific criminal enterprises in American history. The legacy of the Boudreaux case continues to influence how we understand organized crime, family-based criminal enterprises, and the intersection of legitimate business with illegal activities. The detailed records they left behind provide researchers with unprecedented insight into how such operations develop, maintain themselves, and ultimately collapse when their secrecy is compromised. Today, as we continue to grapple with human trafficking, organized crime, and other forms of systematic exploitation, the story of the Boudreaux family provides both warning and guidance. It shows us that the most dangerous criminal enterprises are often those that can maintain the appearance of legitimacy while engaging in the most horrific crimes, and that the communities most at risk are those where isolation, corruption, and economic desperation create opportunities for predators to operate with impunity. The preservation of evidence from the Boudreaux compound serves as a reminder that truth has a way of surviving even the most determined efforts to conceal it, and that the victims of even the most horrific crimes deserve to have their stories told and their suffering acknowledged. The fact that this evidence remained hidden for over a century before being discovered by accident suggests that there may be other similar cases waiting to be uncovered, other victims whose stories have been lost to history but whose evidence remains buried in the forgotten corners of our communities. As you reflect on this story, I encourage you to consider how the dynamics that enabled the Boudreaux family's crimes continue to operate in our world today. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you're aware of similar cases or unexplained disappearances in your community's history, please consider sharing that information as well. Only by bringing these hidden histories to light can we hope to prevent future tragedies and honor the memory of those who suffered in darkness for far too long. The story of the Boudreaux family reminds us that evil often wears the mask of respectability, that the most dangerous predators are those who can operate within legitimate business structures, and that the price of safety is eternal vigilance against those who would exploit our basic needs and trust for their own horrific purposes. In remembering their victims, we commit ourselves to ensuring that such systematic evil never again finds fertile ground in the shadows of our communities.